Okay, so hopefully you can see my screen and you can put that in the chat box. Let me know if you can or unmute yourself. Um, but let's go ahead. We're just going to do a really quick, great. We're going to do a really quick review on just some basic algebra skills as we gear up for second semester. So for question number 1, we have to start off by distributing a -3. So we're going to distribute the -3. So that would become -12a plus 9 minus a equals 100. So that's your first step, is to distribute. Your second step is to combine your like terms. So these two are your like terms, which would give you -13a plus 9 equals 100. And now we're going to subtract the 9 from both sides, which is -13a equals 91. And then your last step is to divide by -13. So we're going to take 91 divided by -13, and you should get -7. So let's do one more linear equation, and then we'll switch to quadratics. Okay, good. Take a second and copy this down, and then we'll go through it together. Okay, so let's look at our second question. So we're going to start by distributing this time a positive 4. So we distribute the positive 4, and that's negative 32p minus 32 equals 224. And then we add 32 to both sides, which gives you negative 32p equals 256. And now take your calculators, take 256 divided by negative 32, and you should get that our answer is negative 8. So now let's do another mini factoring review. So take a moment and copy down questions 3 and 4. And then we're going to factor both of these shortly. So take a moment and copy these down in your notes. Okay. So whenever you're factoring, you always start by looking for a greatest common factor. And I just realized that it didn't have the directions at the top. So the directions are to factor it completely. There we go. So factoring them each completely. So let's look at question number 3. You don't have a GCF, so we're going to make our box. V squared is in the top left. Positive 9 is in the bottom right. So in order to factor, you need two numbers that multiply to be 9. They multiply and equal 9, and then they add to be negative 10. So if you know those numbers, send me a message in the chat box. Two numbers that multiply to be positive 9, but add and equal negative 10. Okay, thank you. -1 and -9. So we're going to put our -1b in one square, and the -9b is in the other square. The only thing that multiplies to be b squared is b times b. In the second column, my GCF is -1, because that is what multiplies, or that's the GCF that I can take out of that column. That's what can come out of these two. And for my bottom row, both of these are 9. So we can divide these both by 9. And we're actually going to take out a -9 because the sign always matches the number it touches. So it's going to factor down to b minus 1 times b minus 9. And that would be your final answer for question number 3. And let's take a look at question number 4. We begin by looking for our GCF. And this one does have a GCF, and it's 3. So let's divide everything by 3. When you divide it by 3, that 3 comes out, and you're left with x squared minus 9x. And now let's take 42 divided by 3, and we get 14. So now we take a look at what we have to see if this can be factored. In order for us to factor what I have in my parentheses, I need to find two numbers that multiply to be 14 and add to -9. So I'll give you about 60 seconds to see if you can find those numbers. Thank you so much for responding. I always feel like I'm talking to myself. So I'll take the fact, even if there's just one person, that's somebody. So I appreciate it. But the answer is, you're correct, it's -2, -7. So because there are numbers that satisfy this, that means we can factor this down more. If we couldn't find any numbers, then this would be our final answer. But this that I have underlined in green can factor down. So we're going to make our box. We have our x squared here and our 14 here. We put our -2x in one square and our -7x in our other. So it does. What can be, the only thing that multiplies to be x squared is x times x. In my second column, I can take out a -2, and in the bottom row, a -7. So my final answer for question 4 would be 3, because I have the GCF of 3, and that is a factor. So it says factor completely. Question number 4 would have 3 factors. The first factor is 3. Another factor is x minus 2. And my final factor is x minus 7. And this would be my final answer. Okay, so we have one more question, number 5, and that's going to end our algebra review for today. So I'll give you a moment if you're still taking down notes, and then we'll move on to our last question. Okay, so take a moment and copy down our final question for today, question number 5. Okay, so for question number 5, we have a GCF because all of these are even. So that means that we can divide these by 2. So let's divide them all by 2. So the 2 is on the outside. And you're left with 2r squared minus 11r plus 5. So we have to find 2 numbers that would multiply to be a times c, which is 10, and add to b, which is negative 11. If we can't find any numbers that work, then we can't factor it down any further. But there are numbers that multiply to be 10 and add to negative 11. So we're going to use negative 1 and negative 10. So let's create our box. In the top left is my a. So that would be the 2r squared. C goes in the bottom right. And in the other 2 squares, you have negative 1r and negative 10r. So let's go ahead and look at this. In my very top row, the GCF is an R. So I'm taking out what both of these squares have in common. And these 2 squares have an R. They have 1 R in common. So that is what can come out. In this bottom row, these 2 squares have a 5 in common. Both of these have a factor of a 5. But we have to take out a negative 5 because it has to match the sign of the squares closest to. Now we're going to look at our columns. In this first column, well, both of these 2 squares have a 2. They have a 2 in common, and they also have an R in common. And lastly, these 2 squares in the second column have a 1, but it has to be a negative 1 because it has to take the sign of the square it touches. So my final factors would be the 2 that we took out initially, and then we have 2r minus 1 and r minus 5. So we don't have any homework this evening yet because we haven't quite gotten into our Unit 7. Depending on how we progress through the remaining of the week, I may adjust some of the due dates. Hopefully we are in person and you can have your Agile Mind books and we can get started. Have a great day. If you have any questions, I will be on the line a little longer. If not, I will see you tomorrow in class.